We begin in the early part of the 6th century, in a world that is old and layered, a world of empires and kingdoms, of farms and markets and roads built long ago, a world that has been slowly changing for a very long time. The year is 536. The place is everywhere, because what happens in this year does not happen in one city or one kingdom. It happens across the whole of the earth, slowly and quietly, and without anyone fully understanding what is occurring. The world in 536 is organized into a patchwork of powers. In the east, the Byzantine Empire holds the old Eastern Roman lands. Constantinople is its capital, a great city on a narrow strait between two seas. Its streets are busy. Its harbors are full of ships. Its emperor at this time is Justinian I. He has been in power for several years. He is working to restore Roman authority over the Western Mediterranean. His generals are campaigning in North Africa and Italy. In the West, the old Roman Empire in Europe has been fragmented for decades. Germanic kingdoms now hold most of Western Europe. The Visigoths in Spain and southern Gaul, the Franks in northern Gaul, the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Angles and Saxons in much of Britain. These are newer kingdoms, built on the foundations of what Rome left behind. Roman roads still run through them. Roman buildings still stand in their towns. Latin is still used in churches and in administration. Across the water, in Persia, the Sasanian Empire is the great eastern rival of Byzantium. These two powers have been in conflict and negotiation for generations. They share long borders. They trade, they fight, and they watch each other carefully. Further east, in China, the period is one of division and gradual reunification. Multiple states and dynasties compete for control of the Chinese world. In the Arabian Peninsula, communities of farmers, herders, and traders live in the towns and desert margins. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the kingdom of Aksum holds power. In India, various kingdoms and empires shape the subcontinent. All of these places, all of these people, living their lives within the patterns and routines of their time, farming, trading, building, governing, and none of them know what is coming. In early 536, something happens in the sky, something that people notice and record and find deeply unsettling. The sun grows dim, not at sunrise or sunset, when the sun is always pale, but in the middle of the day. The sun, which should be bright and clear, appears instead as a pale disk, a whitish, weakened light, casting less warmth than it should. Contemporary accounts describe this clearly. The Byzantine historian Procopius, who was present in Italy during this period as part of Justinian's military campaigns, writes about it. He describes the sun giving a feeble light, like the moon. He notes that it lasts for a full year. The light does not return to normal for many months. Other accounts come from other parts of the world. A writer in the Eastern Mediterranean describes the sun as darkened. Irish chronicles from this period record a failure of bread in the years around 536 to 539. A contemporary writer in Mesopotamia describes the sun being hidden. These accounts, from different places, written by different people, all describe something similar. A dimming of the sunlight, a strange and unsettling change in the appearance of the sky. What caused this? The answer is not found in the written records of the time. The people who wrote about the dim sun could not know its cause. They had no way to understand what had happened. The cause has been worked out by modern science, through the careful study of ice cores. Ice cores are long cylinders of ice drilled from glaciers. In Greenland and Antarctica, Glaciers have been building up layer by layer for hundreds of thousands of years. Each year, a new layer of snow falls, compresses the layer below, and within those layers, traces of the atmosphere are preserved. Tiny bubbles of ancient air, particles of dust, traces of ash from distant volcanic eruptions. When scientists drill deep into these glaciers and pull out a long cylinder of ice, they can read it like a record. Each layer corresponds to a year, or sometimes to a season. By measuring the chemical composition of each layer, scientists can learn what was in the atmosphere in that year, what gases were present, what particles were floating in the air. The ice core record from around 536 shows something very clear: a large amount of volcanic ash and sulfur particles in the atmosphere. This is the fingerprint of a major volcanic eruption, a very large one that put so much material into the upper atmosphere that it spread around the world. The exact source of the 536 eruption has been the subject of careful scientific investigation. For a long time, the source was uncertain, but analysis of the particles found in ice cores has helped narrow the location. The leading candidate based on recent research is a volcano in Iceland, an Icelandic volcanic eruption of enormous magnitude, sometime in early 536. When a very large volcano erupts, it does not only affect the land around it. If the eruption is powerful enough, it throws material high into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere, the very high part of the atmosphere above the weather systems. Material in the stratosphere is not washed out quickly by rain, can stay there for months or even years, and it spreads. Carried by winds at high altitude, it circles the globe. The material thrown up by a large volcanic eruption includes sulfur dioxide gas. This gas, in the stratosphere, reacts with water vapor to form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid. These droplets are very small, too small to see individually, but collectively, they form a thin veil across the sky, a veil that reflects some of the sunlight back into space. Less sunlight reaches the surface of the Earth. The Earth grows cooler. This is called volcanic cooling, or sometimes volcanic winter when it is severe. It is a well-documented phenomenon. The 536 event is considered by many scientists to have been one of the most significant volcanic cooling events of the past 2,000 years. The dimming begins in early 536. It lasts through that year and into the next. Then, in 540, ice core records show another major volcanic event, perhaps a second eruption, possibly from a different volcano, and in 547, another. These repeated volcanic events compound one another. They keep the atmosphere loaded with material. They keep the sunlight reduced. They keep the Earth cooler than normal. The decade and a half from roughly 536 to 550 is now studied carefully by scientists and historians. The ice core evidence shows this as a period of significant atmospheric disruption. The temperature records embedded in tree rings show it as a period of reduced growth. Trees add a ring each year. The width of the ring reflects how well the tree grew that year. Narrow rings mean a hard year. Years of cold. Years of less sunlight. Less growth. The tree ring records from around the world show narrow, pinched rings in the years following 536. Oaks in Ireland. Pines in the mountains of Europe. Trees in North America. Trees in Asia. All recording, in their quiet wooden way, the same period of reduced sunlight and cold. Now we think about what this means for people, for ordinary people in the 6th century, who know nothing of volcanoes in Iceland or sulfur in the stratosphere. who only know what they see and feel and experience. A farmer in the Mediterranean world in 536 has lived through difficult years before. Drought, heavy rains, early frosts, these things happen. They have always happened. But what begins in 536 is different. Different in its scale. Different in how long it lasts. The growing season shortens. When the sun is weak, temperatures fall. A farm that normally produces enough grain to feed a family and have some left over begins to produce less. The grain does not fill out as it should. The harvest is smaller. In Northern Europe, the effects are more severe. The growing season in the north is already short. A reduction in summer temperatures shortens it further. Crops that barely had time to ripen in a normal year now do not ripen at all. The Irish chronicles that record a failure of bread are precise about this. They are not describing one bad harvest. They are describing a sustained period of shortage. Bread, the basic staple of life, is not available in normal quantities. This is a serious thing, a very serious thing. In a world where most people depend on locally grown grain for most of their calories, a sustained failure of grain is a crisis. We move through the landscape of the Byzantine world in these years. The empire is large. It encompasses Greece and Turkey and Egypt and North Africa and parts of the Middle East. Within this empire, different regions experience the effects differently. The Nile Valley in Egypt is somewhat protected. The Nile flood brings rich silt to the fields each year. This agricultural system is less dependent on rainfall and sunshine in the same direct way. But in the drier margins of the empire, in Syria and Anatolia, in the Balkans, the reduced growing seasons and uncertain rains are felt more directly. And it is in this context of atmospheric disruption and agricultural stress that another event enters the picture. In 541 and 542, the Byzantine Empire is struck by a devastating epidemic. A disease that spreads quickly through a population with no prior exposure to it. This epidemic is now called the Plague of Justinian, named for the emperor in whose reign it appeared. The disease is identified by modern researchers as bubonic plague, the same illness caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis that would later cause the Black Death in the 14th century. This is the first well-documented pandemic caused by this bacterium. It appears in Egypt first in the port city of Pelusium in 541. From there it spreads rapidly. The plague moves through the Mediterranean world. It reaches Constantinople in 542. Contemporary accounts describe the scale of the deaths. Procopius, who is in Constantinople at the time, describes the city overwhelmed. He writes of 10,000 people dying each day at the peak of the outbreak. This number may be exaggerated, but the scale of death he is trying to convey is real. The city could not manage its dead in the normal way. Bodies accumulated. Mass graves were dug. The harbor was full. The streets were changed. The Emperor Justinian himself became ill with the plague. He survived. But the epidemic that bears his name does not end quickly. It returns, again and again over the following decades. Wave after wave of the illness comes back through the populations of the Mediterranean world. Historians now consider the Plague of Justinian one of the factors that contributed to the long-term weakening of the Byzantine Empire. The population losses were significant. The army lost soldiers. Tax revenues fell as populations shrank and economic activity slowed. The ambitious campaigns of Justinian, aimed at restoring Roman power in the West, became harder to sustain. And all of this is happening against the background of the dimmed sun and the reduced harvests. The cold years of the late 530s and 540s weaken people. Malnourished populations are more vulnerable to disease. The two crises, the volcanic cooling and the plague, overlap and compound each other. There is a term that some researchers use for this period: the Late Antique Little Ice Age. This refers to a period of cooler temperatures in the northern hemisphere that the scientific evidence places in the 6th and 7th centuries. The volcanic events of 536, 540, and 547 are considered the trigger. The cooling they initiated persists for a long time, perhaps a century or more. In Scandinavia, the effects are recorded in an interesting way. Archaeological surveys of ancient farmsteads in Norway and Sweden show that a significant number of farms were abandoned during this period. Farms that had been occupied for generations. Farms with houses and outbuildings and field systems simply left. The families that lived there moved away or perished. The farms stand empty. In some cases, they are never reoccupied. The pollen record from lake sediments in Scandinavia shows the same thing. Pollen from cultivated crops and from the weeds that grow in plowed fields disappears in the sediment layers corresponding to this period. And the pollen of wild trees and plants returns. Nature reclaims the abandoned fields. The forest grows back over the farmland. These abandoned farms are quiet evidence. Evidence of communities that could not sustain themselves through the cold years, through the failed harvests, through whatever combination of hardship drove people away. In the British Isles, the period corresponds to the early part of what is sometimes called the Migration Age. The movements of peoples across Europe during the 5th and 6th centuries are complex. Many factors drive them, but the environmental pressure of the 6th century may be one element in a larger picture of displacement and change. In China, the period of the mid-6th century is one of continued political fragmentation and conflict. The dynasties of the north and south are competing. Chinese chronicles from this period also record unusual weather, droughts and floods and unusual cold. These records, from so far away, align with what the ice cores tell us. The global reach of the volcanic veil. In the Arabian Peninsula, the environmental changes of the mid-6th century are studied in connection with the social and political changes of that region. The decades before the rise of Islam in the early 7th century are a time of significant disruption in the Arabian world. The great dams and irrigation systems that supported agriculture in Yemen faced difficulties. The Marib Dam, one of the great engineering works of the ancient world in Yemen, is recorded as having collapsed several times. Whether climate change plays a role in these difficulties is studied by researchers. The picture is complex, but the environmental pressures of this period are real. We come back to the ordinary world, to the level of a single farm, a single family, somewhere in the Mediterranean world. In Italy, perhaps, in the years around 537 or 538, a farmer rises in the morning. The light that comes through the doorway is pale. It has been pale for months now, since early in the previous year. The sun does not feel warm in the way it usually does. The air is cooler than it should be. The farmer knows the season. He knows when things should be planted, when they should be harvested. He knows the rhythms of the year as his parents taught them to him. But this year and the year before, the rhythms are off. The crops that should be ready are not ready. The yields that should fill the storage jars are smaller than expected. He tends his olives. Olive trees are hardy. They can survive difficult conditions better than many crops. But even olive production is affected by prolonged cold. He tends his vines. Grapes need warmth to develop their sugar. In a cool year, the grapes are small. The wine, if there is wine, is thin and sour. He and his family eat more carefully. The stores from the previous harvest are stretched. The bread is thinner. The portions are smaller. The children are quieter than usual. The farmer does not know about Iceland. He does not know about volcanoes throwing material into the stratosphere. He does not know about sulfuric acid droplets circling the globe. He only knows that the sun is wrong, that the sky has a strange color in the morning, that the warmth he relies on is not arriving. People in the 6th century have explanations for such things. The sky is in the realm of God or the gods. An unusual sun means something. It is a sign of divine displeasure, perhaps, or of times that are changing. The clergy and the learned men of the time interpret the dim sun in religious terms. They write about it in those terms. They pray. They hold ceremonies. They look for meaning. Life in Constantinople in these years is particularly layered. The city is large by the standards of the time, perhaps 500,000 people, or perhaps somewhat fewer. It is a city of neighborhoods, of markets and workshops and churches. The great church of Hagia Sophia has just been completed in 537. Its enormous dome is new. Its mosaics are fresh. It is one of the largest interior spaces ever built. People in Constantinople in 537 attend church in this new building. They go to the market. They carry water from the cisterns. They cook their meals over small fires in their homes. They sleep and rise with the rhythms of the city. And overhead, the sky is strange. The sun in the middle of the day does not look as it should. People look up at it. They speak of it to each other. They write letters mentioning it. They record it in chronicles. The dim sun of 536 is one of those historical moments that is documented across many cultures simultaneously. Not because those cultures were in contact. Many of them were not, but because they all shared the same sky, the same thin veil of volcanic material high above, dimming the same sun, cooling the same world. The human response to the cold years is, in many places, an intensification of existing patterns. People who farm move toward foods that survive cold better. Root vegetables rather than grains. Animals rather than crops. They adapt, slowly, with the knowledge and tools they have. Where trade networks exist, they help. A region that fails to produce enough grain can sometimes obtain grain from elsewhere. The Byzantine Empire has a relatively sophisticated system of grain distribution. Egypt sends grain to Constantinople regularly. This system does not collapse, but it is strained. The poor are most affected, as they always are in times of shortage. Those without stores, those without land, those who depend on buying food in the market. When prices rise because harvests are poor, those without resources cannot buy what they need. This is a pattern that repeats across all of history, and it repeats here in the cold years of the late 530s and 540s. The monasteries of the 6th century play a role. They have lands. They have stores. They provide charity to those in need. The monastic tradition of hospitality and care for the poor is active during this period. Monasteries distribute food. They take in travelers. They maintain a kind of stability in times of disruption. The city of Rome in these years is a shadow of what it was. The Roman Empire in the West has been gone for 60 years. The city, once perhaps 1 million people at its peak, is much smaller. Perhaps 100,000 people, or perhaps fewer. The great buildings are still there. The forums, the temples, the aqueducts, some still functioning. But the city is quieter than it was, more uncertain. In 536, Byzantine forces under the general Belisarius enter Rome. The city changes hands as part of Justinian's campaign to retake Italy from the Ostrogoths. The following years are a period of military back and forth. Sieges, negotiations, more conflict. The population of Rome, already reduced, suffers further from the conflict and from the disruptions of the period. The aqueducts that bring water to the city are damaged during the sieges. The water supply is disrupted. The mills that grind grain are watermill, located on the aqueducts and rivers. When the water is cut or reduced, the mills stop. Without mills, grain cannot be ground into flour. Without flour, bread cannot be made. There is an account from this period of a Roman general using floating mills on the Tiber River. Mills mounted on boats, using the current of the river to turn the millstones. A practical solution to the loss of the aqueduct mills. A small detail from a difficult time. People finding ways to continue essential work. The landscape of Italy in these years is a landscape of war and weather together. Fields that might have been tended are abandoned during fighting. Farmers displaced by war cannot return to their land. The agricultural disruption of conflict compounds the agricultural disruption of the cold years. The two pressures work together. We step back from the specific. We think about the larger shape of this moment in history. The years around 536 to 550 represent what some historians and scientists have called the worst period to be alive in the past 2,000 years. This assessment comes from a historian named Michael McCormick, who has studied this period carefully. It is based on the combination of evidence: the volcanic cooling, the agricultural failure, the plague of Justinian, the political disruptions, all arriving within a span of 15 years. And yet people survived. Populations declined. Some communities disappeared. Some regions were changed profoundly. But the world continued. People continued. They adapted. They found ways through. Over the following decades, the volcanic material in the atmosphere gradually settles. The stratosphere slowly clears. The sunlight returns to something closer to normal. The temperatures begin to recover. The tree rings get a little wider again. The harvests improve. The recovery is slow. The plague of Justinian continues to return in waves for another 2 centuries. The political disruptions of the 6th and 7th centuries reshape the map of the world. But the acute crisis of the late 530s and 540s passes. The world that emerges from this period is somewhat different from the one that entered it. The Byzantine Empire is weakened. The ambitions of Justinian to restore a unified Roman Mediterranean are not fully realized. The Germanic kingdoms of Western Europe consolidate their positions. In the Arabian Peninsula, the 7th century brings enormous changes. The rise of Islam transforms the political and cultural geography of the Middle East, North Africa, and eventually much of the known world. Historians debate how much the environmental crisis of the mid-6th century contributed to these large historical shifts. The connection between climate, disease, and political change is real. But it is not simple. Many factors are always at work. The volcanic cooling of 536 is one thread in a very complex fabric. An important thread. A thread that modern science has helped us see more clearly than was possible before. But one thread among many. What the ice cores and the tree rings and the written chronicles together tell us is this: that in the year 536, something happened to the sky. A volcano somewhere in the north threw its material into the atmosphere, and the world got colder, and the harvests failed. And then a plague came, and people struggled. And then, slowly, the sky cleared, and the sun came back, and the world went on. There is something quietly remarkable about the evidence for this event. The ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica are read by scientists in cold laboratories. They are drilling into ancient ice, pulling out layers of frozen time. And within those layers, they find the fingerprint of a morning in 536, the ash of a volcano, the sulfur of an eruption, preserved for 1,500 years in the ice. And beside that scientific evidence, the words of Procopius, a man sitting in Italy in 536, looking up at the dim sun, writing down what he sees, not knowing why, just recording the world as it appears to him. A pale sun in the middle of the day, lasting a full year, the two kinds of evidence, the frozen ice and the written word, meeting each other across 15 centuries, and together telling the same story. The year 536, a year like any other in that it came and went. People woke in the morning. They did their work. They ate their meals. They watched the sky. They worried, perhaps. They prayed. And they went to sleep at the end of the day, as people have always done. And as people will always do. We slow down now. The narration settles toward its close. Outside, somewhere in the 6th century world, the pale sun is setting. The light is thin and cool. A farmer returns to his house at the end of the day. The fire inside is warm. The door closes behind him. The children are there. The meal is prepared from what there is. It is enough for tonight. And the dim sky slowly darkens, and the stars come out, unchanged by the volcanic veil below them, the same stars they have always been, the same stars they will always be, looking down on a world that endures, quietly, steadily, through every cold year, through every difficult season, always finding its way through.